with COVID-19 continuing to dominate the news, and with our news feeds full of opinions, thoughts, suppositions, theories, and arguments, I thought it would be nice to remember that one of the essential services we have is journalism. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to talk to veteran journalist Marianne Thamm at the time of the publication of her memoir. Now with the Daily Maverick, it's also still important to remember that there were a whole bunch of other issues that concern South Africans that seem to have slipped below the radar. So tonight I'm re-screening that interview with Marianne Thamm, and who will raise some of those issues for us to remind ourselves to spread our concerns and remember that there is life outside of the virus.
Marianne, I've waited such a long time for you to be sitting here. Since I first read the book, it was last year I read your book.
It feels like longer.
Yeah. Right from the beginning, and I think especially even right at the beginning of the book, the thing that really struck me about your book was that it was so much a book about your father and your relationship with him. I felt that I was reading a book about a relationship with a difficult father that gradually changes and doesn't change easily either. It requires a lot of you for that relationship to actually change. The striking thing that you start with is that the fact that your dad, coming from Germany, was a member of the Hitler Youth, and you find yourself in this country understanding what's going on, and yet your father seems to represent an earlier fascist regime or whatever. So did you struggle from that early on? How conscious were you early on about what's happening in this country?
I was very conscious, and I think I see it now. I see all the differences that I embody as blessings, because when you feel out of place in a community, and that was a white mixed English Afrikaans speaking immigrant community in Pretoria, and you could, the Afrikaans kids were working class and quite hostile towards us, but that was fun as a child. But I saw the responses to black South Africans around me, the yellow vans arriving, just arresting people en masse. I mean, as a child witnessing that, you realize something's very wrong here. Or you have people being chased off lawns when they're sitting resting. And so as a child, you begin to become awakened to something really quite ugly happening in the world. And then you realize you're different, because you don't really like boys that way. You like them very, very much in every other aspect. But in the one aspect that sort of, is expected of you, you don't. So I think those were the slow awakenings. And my father was I found him a very beautiful man in many ways. But when I became aware of the politics and that he was German and was watching the world at war, and the absolutely devastating effects that Germans had on people's lives. I mean, 55 million people died in that war. Wow. That's more than are alive in South Africa today.
It's inconceivable.
It's inconceivable.
Really.
And so apart from the Holocaust and the number of people persecuted and killed, and was I felt the spiritual aftermath of what did that do to people in Europe? What did that do to my father? How did this happen? And how come somebody in my house, he's not just in books, I mean, there's somebody walking around in my house who did this. I am from him and of him. And I think that I found existentially very painful to deal with. And and it keeps evolving, and it keeps taking new shapes as I've let go of him in one way, come to terms with him in the book another way. I've put him in his it's like a hard drive. I've downloaded him.
Okay, so he's nicely contained.
He's nicely contained in that book, and I've come to love him very deeply in the aftermath of that. Understanding we are all caught in our time, and that we should be doing more, but we don't always know how to do more. And that I wanted to find out, who is George, scoured of all of those things we told we are. The culture, the language, the history, the maleness. I wanted to find an essence of that spirit that was there, but it's very damaged by much of what was around him. And so I think I've come to see in the working through of all of that an essence of George. I saw his interaction with other people, and that's what really mattered to me more than what he said.
Exactly.
My father was never rude to anybody. My father was, despite himself, immediately fell in love with my children.
And his reaction to your children was just amazing.
It was really beautiful. Because I warned him. I said to him, I detect anything, and they're out of your life. And he was unable to help himself. And I was looking for that.
Yeah.
That spirit that was unable to help itself, that just fell in love with the children. So, and my mother also had a stroke a long, long time before that. So I lost her almost in that way. But she's always there as well. I mustn't forget her. That feminine energy, I mustn't forget her.
No, well, I mean, I think she is in the background to me all the time. I read the book thinking a lot, I wonder what your mother is, what's happening to your mother, because, she herself said, you say in the book, that the last thing she wanted to do was have a stroke and be kept alive. And that's what happens to her. So I kept on wondering, kind of, did she know that was going to happen? Why did she even say that?
Maybe.
But so George was watching World at War. How did he respond to how it was depicted?
What I can remember, and of course all our memories are different as we, what I can remember him saying is that be careful, because this is sort of, some of it is American propaganda. You won't be seeing what happened to the people of Dresden. In this series, you won't be. They didn't go to war in certain places because people made sausages there. The people went for oil. So I think he tried to understand the kind of deeper political levels of what was happening, but that still, for me, didn't justify anything.
No, nothing justifies. But I was always aware that we never see anything about resistance, and there must have been.
Yes. Well, listen. I mean, the atomic bomb is also something we kind of think, well, that's okay because the Allies did it.
Yeah.
They did it to the bad guys. And so it was that. I think he was trying to say, look, it's not as simple as it seems. And I was saying it's very simple. It's about choices. You either kill people because of what they are or you don't. And either you use a war to do that, or you use the chaos of a war to persecute a neighbor. Or a fellow human being. But that is the human condition. That's what I've come to realize, shockingly, that it's about a state of equilibrium that needs to be found, and that there are always people, and it continues now, who sort of, gather the forces of greed and evil and self-interest, and then there are always people who fight it and who pay.
Yeah.
But both sides pay.
They're both sides, and so as you said, it's clearly part of the human condition, and we've always been doing it.
And that you must never stop, and that's what I thought I could relax. I thought I could sit under a tree and smoke a joint on an upturned Coke crate and go, yes, we've done it. But no, all the people I've met who are relatively intact and able to fight quite an oppressive system have mothers who've loved them ridiculously. So my mother did that for my brother and I. She just absolutely adored us, thought we were wonderful, which we did too for a very long period of time until we realized it. One of my first girlfriends says, look, I just thought I was lovable. I didn't have to do anything about it. I didn't have to do anything like that. So my mom has given me what I call this panic room, this nest inside of myself that I can retreat into when I feel it's too much, and it's very safe and wonderfully loving, and then I can from there always, I'm surprised myself, plot a comeback. So whatever goes wrong, and I kind of don't take things personally in the universe, like either losing a job or losing a contract.
That's a great mother. Because I think she did accept you.
She did. Yeah, she did. There's something about it having equal rights that then renders you unable to fight back. I'm a rebel. I want to rebel against something. I don't want to be like everybody else, paying tax and being able to get married. So suddenly I'm like everyone else. So I think I have oppositional personality disorder.
Quite willful, I think, is what.
Yes, and I think my father and my family suffered because of my willfulness, and I felt constantly marginalized. But I do think I was quite a force to be reckoned with, and although I did see myself as a bit of a victim then.
So when you started working as a journalist in 1982 or something, and so you had that strong and rebellious character, was that partly what motivated? I mean, was political journalist on the horizon from the beginning, or was it just their job?
Well, I don't think there wasn't. I don't think at that point I had any idea what the hierarchy was like, and it was very much a man's world. Remember, I had a very naive and childish reason for entering journalism, and that was really simply saying I wanted to tell the truth.
Well,
I could see that what was going on around me just wasn't what was just wasn't okay, and then I thought this would be quite a nice way to find a platform with my messianic complex that I would fix this.
Well, it might be naive, but it's pure. It's a motivation.
Well, Bob Marley was my guide. Bob Marley was my sort of held my hand through the ether there. So that was kind of what I wanted to do. It was like, this doesn't have to be this way. What can I do? How can I play a role? Quite naively thinking, well, let's find a truth-telling mechanism. And that sort of was what it was.
And it grew, obviously, you know.
Well, as you get sort of plunged into the truth, because you wil mos know, then you start to see what it is you need to see. And that job took me from sort of normal general reporting in courts where everybody washes up, you know, who's on the wrong side of the law. And at that point, you didn't have to do much to be on the wrong side of the law. You just had to be black.
Yeah.
You know,
Basically.
and then you were on the wrong side of the law. So you begin to see, you know, you choose this thing. And then when it became sort of insane, because the one story I wanted to do was I thought one of my parents had been murdered, and kind of accepted it as just, oh, well, okay.
Wow.
It's now happened to me. Was then when the newsroom decided, no, you're not okay. And that's when I was beautifully transitioned into the other space that has held me and nourished me and opened up what that other world was, and that's the arts.
Right.
It was theatre, poetry,
Yeah.
music. It came into my life just as I needed it, and it was as confrontational. And I realized that this space had a kind of a different ethos to it. There was a light to the brutality and the darkness. There was a shaping of the narrative that could be taken back and could be regurgitated and presented back. The truth-telling had more layering than just there is the dead body,
Right.
there is the blood, there is
Right.
the this, there is the that, there is the brutality. And so you know, it came to shape and become this thing, moulded something. I realized very soon in that world, at that time, that your career path was limited as a woman. You know, less limited than the generation before me, but still limited.
So then how did that get to women's magazines? Was one of the things that maybe I can go further in a world like that?
Well, what's interesting, I think, is that Jane Raffaele realised as the country changed. Now, Jane is just very sort of plugged into the frequencies of what is happening around her,
Very much
and how,
so.
yeah, absolutely, and how she can introduce that to her audience. She knows who her audience is, and she knows what they need to learn or how they need to be shifted into the new space of the world. So Jane's capacity for that must never be underestimated. And in the late 80s, early 90s, Jane was understood that the Berlin Wall had come down, that South Africa's politics was about to change, and she needed to get into her magazines journalists who'd been in the so-called real world. Pippa Green, who was a Labour journalist, myself, I'm trying to think of who else was there. Quite a few journalists who'd kind of been on the front lines of the ugly. And she said to us, look, come and work for us. I think that, you know, Jane interviewed me and I said, look, I always used to wear black. I've gone back to wearing it because it's so easy. My mother used to say, you all wear black when I die, but she didn't realise I really love black. But I was wearing a pair of boots with a hole underneath because I didn't care, and I said I roll my own tampons, Jane, cut my own hair. And she laughed, and she said, no, what I'd like are journalists to try and interview the Baleka Khotsisile Mbetes who'd come back from exile, who French and Wala, what was happening. So there was that is what drew us into women's magazines.
Wow.
And it was an interesting experience, you know, on many other fronts. It took me into a world that I had absolutely no interest in, you know, fashion and makeup.
She actually once said to me, I'd sooner send out a magazine without a cover than without a horoscope.
Absolutely. And it was hugely popular.
Yeah.
You know, there's this thing with that those of us who claim to be non-believers sort of, you know, it's all about, you know, molecules and kind of, I mean, I love watching this channel of yours because as I said to you earlier, because I've been immersed in, I think, this really ugly, dirty shadow underworld. I thought I'd escaped it, but I'm back in it. And I often feel like I need to go and bathe in the rivers of Jordan to clean myself of what I know. And Jacques Poe has made it visible now. But I'd go and watch you and think, let's see what Rod's doing here.
I'm going to get back to
And you
the
were
rest
right.
in a
You've
second.
been right.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Because I was amazed. I think I found myself in your book. I mean,
Yes, you did. You did in the chapter
I
about
did.
my mom.
Yeah, when you go to visit your white Sangoma astrologer friend.
Yes.
Oh,
I
did
bumped
you-
into
was
you,
that-
and I happened to just mention
you
the
mentioned
bees,
it, yeah.
and because it was such a peculiar occurrence.
Right.
Outside this terrible industrial funeral parlour with these ridiculous rituals going on, my poor mum in her chipboard coffin, and this massive swarm of bees at the entrance, and it just felt significant to me. And they weren't hostile. And you told me.
Yeah, they come from the ancestors' bees.
Yeah.
You mentioned that in the book that it was your Saturn return, and I think you clearly
Yes,
did
that
take
as
on
well.
board stuff
I
about the
did.
Saturn
I
return.
did.
And you finished that chapter saying you're going to be ready next time.
Yeah.
I do want to tell you they come every 29 days.
I know. Is it like, is it out?
There's another one
When
coming.
is
You're
it
not
over?
58 yet.
I think I am.
No,
How
I
old
don't
am
think
I?
you're 58.
61. I was born. What am I? 57.
You're 57.
I don't
No,
tell me.
56. You're 56.
Oh God,
You're
2
heading
years
for
at least.
57.
I've embraced myself.
So yeah, and the second one is much better than the first.
Oh, better.
Yeah, the
Oh,
first one is like a
God.
squeeze. The second one is like a release.
I almost didn't make
Yeah.
it through that one. I must tell you. I kind of.
They live up to their reputation. Those certain turns. They're very good at persuading people that astrology is real because it happens every time.
No, it's just chaotic, and you think whatever you try and do to fix it, just no. This is you're not in control right now. And I had to. I mean, I claim to be a material rash. I think the universe is indifferent most of the time, but I also am so open to other ways of thinking, which is why I love living in Africa and South Africa.
very
It
well
makes
said.
perfect sense to
Yeah.
me. You know, to live with the notion of ancestral guidance.
Yeah.
I feel my father.
So you mentioned Jacques Poe's book, which has just come out in the
yes,
last
yes,
couple
yeah.
of weeks.
Yeah.
And that how you've gone back into that side of journalism. Everyone knows that you've been a major part of writing about the Gupta leaks and the whole process of the captured state. And so firstly, considering Jacques Poe and what's just been going on there, have you ever felt unsafe? Have you ever felt in danger?
Well, actually, at times I have. I have to explain that the Gupta leaks is very much a Daily Maverick sort of thing.
Yes,
when
and
it
you write for
happened,
Daily
we
Maverick.
realised, oh shit, this is really big. Now, I'm one of those journalists, I'm one of those people. I have a problem with money. I dislike it. I dislike the financial system, and I dislike what it means. So my big flaw as a journalist is the inability to understand money. And so I'm able to do that kind of journalism on a different level, which is to explain to ordinary people like myself who don't get the money what was happening, who the key players are. Then you get these amazing people in Amagongani and Scorpio who can follow the money trails, who understand how shelf companies work out. But this is global. This is a global new thing. Journalists in the future are going to have to track the people who steal our money. And Putin's done it. Trump has done it. Jacob Zuma is a big player in a very big global complete shift in what politics is.
So this hasn't always been going on. It's like the new politics.
Well, I think it's the new politics. It's slowly been leading up to it. And what is wonderful about it is that South Africa is once again at the center of a global change. Mandela did that in a way. And I think if you look at what's happening now, there was a very interesting piece, I think in the Financial Times this week, which indicates that the role of KPMG, McKinsey, all these firms, accountants and consultants, in milking the South African state is actually the story. We know politicians are corrupt.
Exactly.
They were corrupt in the
old
past.
news, yeah.
Look, take your 10%, but for God's sake, build the hospital.
Yeah.
You know, we participate in the charade of democracy. We vote for you because we know. But we expect the so-called private sector, the accountants, the bean counters, to actually hold politicians in line, not tell them, look, this is a good offshore place. The new Paradise Papers shows you that there is a terrible voraciousness around that. So it's capitalism, unfettered, unregulated, and it has wreaked havoc in the world, and it is creating a wide gap. There isn't a middle. There is still a middle class, but it's slow. It's quickly disappearing. There's an absence of finding your way out of this hole. It's deliberate. You get more. They've created fake money or non-existent money, so we all create more and more debt. No matter how hard you work, it just suddenly rates will go up. You'll have to pay more for water. So just when you think you're above water, you owe again. So there's a part of me that's rebellious that thinks I will die owing millions, and I will divorce my family so that they can't legally be responsible for it. If that's what you want from me, banks, SARS, and everyone else, fine, I'll play the game.
Yeah.
But I don't want to. I want to do the right thing. But I do think this is a global thing, and I think we're going to realise it more and more and more. And I think journalists are going to have to become forensic investigators. And so what Jacques has done is exposed the people behind it. He's named them. We've known who they are. A lot of us have known. I found it very hard to discover and uncover exactly the extent of it. And he's just put it all in the book and done a lot of his own legwork as well, got people to speak to him. So that's what I've been immersed in for the last 2 to 3 years, and it hasn't been pleasant.
So then the question then begs, does it ever end? Will capitalism eventually collapse into itself? Or is there an end to
I don't
this?
know. What I'm hoping is South Africans practice direct democracy in rural areas. It's been corrupted, it's been poisoned by the previous apartheid government. But there's something very beautiful about the constitution and traditional law. And if you go back and look at some of the work that's been done with the Bakhafera tribes and what's happened with the Wild Coast in terms of mining, you see tremendous potential in South Africa for a return to direct democracy.
And so that's where, people have access to the chief.
Yes.
He listens to everyone.
Yes.
They sit in
They
big
guide
councils
him.
and everyone discusses.
Yes. But this strange, we all have it. White South Africans have lived for many years in a world that is of champagne parties and no worries, swimming pools and Chevrolet. And that's what everybody else wants. But it's not what we should be wanting. We should be wanting, that's what surprised me the most about the South African transition, is I thought we'd become more African. I think it was just the systems were so entrenched that it wasn't possible to dislodge it. And I think it's human nature to want those things.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure globally what capitalism, I loathe it. And people think when I say that I'm a communist. I'm a social democrat.
Yeah.
I would like us all to have enough.
Yeah.
I don't understand why you need 13 cars in the basement. I'm working on another story now where once again you realize that there are foreign white interests, business people, who have corrupted South Africans, black and white. And I find there's something so contemptuous and loathsome of that attitude that you can come here and buy off people in government and then in
It's
the process.
extremely predatory. I mean,
Very
it's
predatory.
in the extreme.
And they are white people. And so white monopoly capital is not Johann Rupert. I mean, Johann Rupert is a businessman.
Yeah.
All businessmen, even Mother Teresa, there's nothing you can do in a capitalist world that is without sin, to use that word. Johann Rupert creates jobs and he sells luxury goods and he pays tax and he used to run tobacco.
Right, exactly.
But he has not captured the state.
Yeah, that's the difference.
There are other white businessmen who have, and it shall emerge in good time. But these are dangerous times. I haven't felt personally threatened. I have now and again. The Guptas and the shadow state is one part of the story. The other part of the story involves commercial interests who've captured the state.
Right, and as you say,
and it's
capitalism won't
and it's
lie down
a much more
quietly.
dangerous one because it's about how we maintain law and order and what that means.
So do you think, I mean, I really want to put it this way, do you think there's any hope for us in South Africa?
I do.
What's our hope?
Well, I suppose my hope is that, and I always say this and it's become a bit of a corny cliche, but I always quote Marx, not Karl Groucho Marx.
Right.
Who you can believe, me or your eyes? Okay. South Africans defeated apartheid.
One of the biggest beasts that ever
Remember,
roamed.
we lived there.
Yeah, we
And
lived
it was this low-grade, ongoing civil war. We're there again. We throw stones. We disrupt. We know. I think there's something about South Africans. I don't think we're exceptional. But I think the exiles who came back in the ANC and who are now running the show don't understand the exile mentality. What I do worry about is that there's a lack of political education. I mean, there's a fabulous series called Have You Heard from Johannesburg? I quoted it recently, where you hear, which we didn't see in South Africa, Oliver Tambo speaking, and you see the justness and rightness of that struggle. So the ANC consisted of Mandela cauterized like a monk on Robben Island and becoming the spiritual being, and then Oliver Tambo, this amazingly principled human being in the outside world, building the international face of the ANC. And then you have what happened in Africa in the camps where Jacob Zuma was. And others, and they're in ascendancy.
Exactly.
I have met very, very strong, wonderful, principled people in this country who have kept me going the last 2 years. Whistleblowers inside every department.
It's good to know, although as we know, whistleblowers suffer.
They suffer.
They've
lost their jobs.
Yeah.
But there are so many good people. I have to believe. I mean, it was, I think, Václav Havel who talked about needing to hope. Because that's what young people do. They intrinsically, developmentally, need to hope. And I while I'm heading for my second Saturn return, I have always maintained a hope that South Africans, we're always 5 minutes to midnight. And even if we go past 5 minutes to midnight, that means we can't give up.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping the ANC will say to those in the middle, you have sinned, do not sin again. Because from here onwards, if the ANC manages to reconstitute itself, and it's going to be a hard, hard job, you need a leader who will go to those people and say, here, no more. You can stay in the party, we're not going to make you go out into the wilderness, but you serve the people from now on.
Do they have such a person yet, or are we waiting for that to arise in the ranks from the youngsters?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm an eternal pessimistic optimist.
I think I'm going to take that as a good thing. That sounds good. Well, it's been really great talking to you. We could talk so much more, but I do look forward to us sitting here in 5 years' time saying, isn't that amazing how that works out?
Yeah,
We
and
will.
I believe that we're on the same wavelength here. And you're also an umlungu who knows about the ancestors now.
Always nice to take our mind off things, even if it's onto other serious things. I will see you again at the same time